Good afternoon. General Carter, it's a great privilege to be here, and it's particularly a privilege to be asked to speak with the likes of General Paul, General Tim on stage, folks that I've had the opportunity to serve with downrange, and the audience, of course, is full of a lot of old friends, so it's great to be here. I welcome the opportunity to briefly introduce the idea of integrated campaigning. This idea rose out of an Army Marine Corps Special Operations Command initiative, which I think we've actually introduced here before, the Strategic Land Power Initiative. This idea is one of two joint concepts that we're jointly developing with our other services and other agencies. One is the human aspects of military operations, which is one of those hard-learned lessons from the last decade of conflict, and the one I'll talk to you about today. As we work through the implications of the last decade and look to the future, it became apparent that the entire joint international and interagency team needed to operate differently. So we chose not to do this as a trilateral effort, but actually broaden it from there. So this issue is bigger than land power, but as many have made the point today, land power plays an essential and often foundational role. In addition to the constant threat of conventional war in Korea and frankly in the Middle East, the harbingers of future conflict include the agile use of conventional, irregular political information and economic actions in the campaign we see continuing in Ukraine, the use of economic and diplomatic means in conjunction with military and civil maritime demonstrations of force to pursue territorial and political objectives in Asia, asymmetric nation-driven instability activities in North Asia, regular and irregular support of states and non-state actors in multiple countries in the Middle East, and the Islamic State's campaigning with state-like capabilities in the Middle East. These operations reflect many of the points that you see on this slide, and indeed, they are not drawn from any one set of doctrine, although some of them may look familiar. They're actually the convergence of the doctrine of 4 or 5 different states, all of whom are operating in much the same way right now. And the concepts that they're prosecuting these operations with, that they self-describe as non-contact, non-symmetrical, non-linear, semi-hard, soft warfare, standoff, precision, and irregular. I want to make the point that conventional forces, we constantly focus on little green men and activities like that. Conventional forces often figure heavily in creating the political military space that allows those special operations, intelligence, proxy, civil, and commercial activities to actually take place and succeed. As well, those forces make their own direct contributions. Having said that, all of them are aimed at success without inviting the intervention of the international community. This is perhaps out of a perceived weakness on the part of a nation or other group who is conducting operations like this. It may well be their philosophy. We all know that Sun Tzu advocates that the acme of the best generals are those who win without fighting. Or it may be merely practicality, but in all cases, they're operating in a different way. In this environment, our current linear planning and campaigning constructs, now this reflects U.S. doctrine, but I think most of us operate in much the same way, and the authorities, resources, and activities associated both with each phase and the conditions that are currently necessary to move from one phase to the other actually limit our ability to respond to crisis and instability as it unfolds today. This limitation on our part, and it's very much self-imposed, creates opportunities for exploitation by our rivals, competitors, and adversaries. Simply put, they are waging war in the space that we currently call peace. to achieve outcomes that, frankly, in the past were traditionally the result of Phase 3 combat operations. They execute patterns of operations that many will find unfamiliar, and they perhaps are not truly new forms of warfare, but those approaches challenge our current frameworks for deterrence, denial, and defeat of aggression. Our current formulations on deterrence focus on deterrence of traditional war, and failing that, denying our adversaries their objectives, or, if necessary, completely defeating their aggression. As I noted previously, we can't afford to cede that space. Indeed, while some of our rivals are operating as they are today, it's because they recognize that they cannot risk trying to gain objectives through open warfare. However, we also have to realize that we have to look beyond that traditional formulation of deterrence. As I said, our adversaries are acting in peace to achieve the objectives that in the past were the result of traditional war. Deterrence of traditional war remains necessary, indeed essential, but is insufficient. We must be capable of operating effectively against all challenges in all spaces, including in consolidation. Our traditional war-making capabilities have proven effective in deterring that level of conflict and has driven our adversaries into this space that we call peace. And while the immediate outcomes may be less dramatic, at the end of the day, the political outcomes may prove to be very similar and not, as people have emphasized earlier, in our national interest. The ways and means will vary, but we must realize our opponents are waging war now. Our actions cannot merely seek to prevent this so-called hybrid war, as Nadia Shadlow defined it, the blurring and blending of previously separate categories of conflict to achieve desirable political goals. We can't just prevent that from escalating into traditional war, a NATO Article 5 violation, if you will. Our approach must also effectively address Article 4.999 violations as well. If we don't, we may find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be. So the challenges we face and our responses cannot be neatly categorized. Doing so creates the seams where these hybrid wars can succeed. This requires we align and integrate the authorities of our commanders, the resources we give them, and the actions they're authorized to do to meet the challenges of both peace and war, closing those seams, countering our adversaries' hybrid actions, creating more options for our policymakers and commanders, and creating multiple dilemmas for our opponents, which will then allow us to seize the initiative from the onset of a crisis and exploit that initiative to deliver favorable strategic outcomes, not merely operational. Thank you.